Welcome to another episode of The Shift with Elena Agar. In this episode, I chat with Teresa Vozza. She is an executive coach working particularly with women in the workplace, helping eradicate burnout and actually prevent that from happening in the first place. So really focusing on that well-being piece and looking to, how can we manage our energy better? She has amazing tips and insights that she has shared. She's very genuine, very passionate about what she does. And I think you will really enjoy this conversation. Teresa, welcome to the Shift podcast.
Thank you, Elena. I'm glad to be here.
So you have a lot of experience in really integrating the mind and the body and leadership and how does it all come together. But before we go into all of that, let's just give me a little bit of an idea of what is the Crucible and what has been your inspiration for starting that.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so the Crucible, which is for your listeners, it's a group coaching program for women at that director plus level who are looking to step into their next stage of leadership. And it was created, or I would say it was born from my own personal crucible, which really put me in a position of having to come to terms with my leadership, my past, my ways of leading in the corporate world. And just to give you an idea of what I mean by that is when I think about a crucible, the reason the name is so important to me is because it's all about transformation, right? It's all about how do we transform something from lead into gold. And a lot of the times that comes from experiences and stories and hardships that we have gone through in our life. And for myself, I hit a real personal transformation crucible story in 2015 when I suffered from extreme burnout in the workplace. I was promoted at the time that I actually did experience that. I was just promoted. To Vice President of Human Resources, and I was working for a new leader. And in my effort to impress and in my effort to make a strong impression, I over-indexed quite rapidly on overachievement. So what that looked like for me, and I'm sure many of your listeners can relate, is saying yes to all the things, to volunteering for too many additional projects, for worrying consistently and constantly about whether or not I was doing a good enough job, really struggling with assertiveness and the ability to hold my own in front of authority figures, especially male authority figures. And that led me to experiencing a great amount of anxiety. And in 2015, I'll never forget it, I was wheeled out of the boardroom in a stretcher because I had had a panic attack, although at the time I thought it was a heart attack. And it was a defining moment for me in my leadership because I was right in front of the CEO. I just got promoted. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed, all of the things. And really that became a turning point for me to really examine my relationship to work, my relationship to myself, to my physical self, my mental self, my emotional self, and really started me down this journey of my own healing, which then led me to want to bring what I learned and in my journey through coaching to other women in similar positions as myself. And that was what led to the creation of the Crucible, which is a thriving program today.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You know what's interesting is I have a lot of guests, of course, on my podcast and just people that I talk to, and it always seems to be there's that theme of either something happens, right, like something extreme in a person's life where it could be, maybe it's happening to the person, maybe it's to their, loved ones and so on, that forces us to pause. Or in 2020, when we all had to pause, and it's almost like when we and at those times when we have the time to think and pause, or because it's really just it's almost, I see it as the pause, not just the thing that happened, but it's the fact that you stop doing, and then you're like, wait a minute, and it's a recurring theme, yet we keep falling into it. So is there some, like, what can we do to prevent that from happening? Like, how do we create intentional pauses in a way that we actually listen? So you know what I'm saying? Like in a way that we actually like let's actually do this on purpose. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Just like, yeah, let's just take a day off. Like, no,
Yeah.
intentionally, like, think about what you want to do.
Yeah, I love that you asked that question. I am maniacal, if you will, about self-care, but not in the way that people traditionally associate self-care. So let me explain what I mean. For me, self-care it goes beyond the tactical. Goes beyond the day off, to use your example. It goes beyond having a bath or booking a girls' weekend or whatever it might be. For me, it's a process of continually asking yourself, what do I need and what is missing? And really checking in. We were speaking earlier about mind body. Like, what are the signals that my body is sending me, both physically, but also mentally and emotionally? And for example, anxiety is a strong signal. And so I think to answer your question, I think first and foremost, it starts with really getting people to understand, specifically because I work a lot with women, is understanding what overcare looks like. Because I think we've been conditioned to care too much, to be uber reliable. And so it starts with like unpacking those, in many cases, conditioned beliefs from ourselves as young girls. Whether you grew up in a patriarchal traditional household or not, it doesn't matter, because we live in that type of society, or we grew up in that. And so really starting to undo those beliefs, and that starts with education. So one of the things I'm really passionate about, Elena, is really getting in front of women sooner, so that we don't have what occurred to me, which is like all of a sudden you ignore because you don't think, because you falsely believe that this is the cost of becoming an executive, which is what my belief system was. This is the cost of becoming an executive leader. You have to put in your time. You have to do more work, whatever it might be. So I think it really starts with education, role models, mentors, sponsors. I think every woman in an organization should arm themselves with a mentor or a sponsor, someone who has gone before them, or a coach, to help them untangle those beliefs that are like I want to say locked in, but those beliefs that are like they're all enmeshed.
Mm.
So I think it really does start with that, education being number one, and listening to the very early signs of the body, because the loud ones are obvious: panic attack, getting reeled out in a stretcher. But the more subtle ones are also like those micro indicators are also really important. So feeling tired, feeling low energy, feeling bored, feeling apathetic, feeling irritable, feeling disrespected, any of those micro feelings that we tend to ignore, I would go on the record to say, just stop and listen. And I think it starts with listening to those teeny tiny clues that, if you catch them early, they don't lead to a macro problem like myself, like what I experienced, and I'm sure many other women and men have experienced too. So paying attention to the early, small indicators that your body gives you and your thinking gives you is a surefire way to help protect yourself from a greater fallout.
Hmm. And it's so powerful that you talk about these things, and that's what you're kind of putting out there, because I think, especially as women and men as well, of course, but I know you work mainly with women, and so with women, it's so hard, because I don't know how many times I've had really close friends of mine who, of course, like, they have families, kids and husband, and high level jobs and so on. And it's like, and it's almost like you said, we're conditioned to put ourselves last. And I think and it's like, when you speak on these topics, you're like, yeah, okay, I remember now. Let me try to do something. And I think we don't talk about it enough. And if you don't have an environment or like a
Yes.
coach or a
Yes.
community, right, which is where it's so powerful to have that program, a community, because it's not, and I think that's what most people need, is like, we know what we need to do. Like, I was listening to somebody and say, well, like, we all know we need to eat healthy, sleep good, but do we actually do it? Like the blueprint is there. And I think this is where that community and the coaching, the accountability has to be there.
Yeah, you nailed it on the head. I was just saying this to a group of women yesterday that the missing link, I believe, from going from knowing something to embodying something is often that culture of accountability. It's that culture of shared purpose. It's that culture of open sharing, of shared experience, of a community of practice. And I think, especially now, since the pandemic, I've seen so many or such a leaning towards individualization because we work from home, many of us now, or at least partially. And so we've gotten used to trying to go it alone. And what I'm starting to see is a craving, especially from women leaders, for comrades, for having people in their community that they can say, this is what I'm struggling with. What other suggestions may be available to me? What other ways of thinking? What other people can I tap into? So having that community that you can not only get coached in, but also share common struggles and receive from other like-minded women possible solutions is invaluable. I mean, all the traditional leadership programs out there don't offer that, which is what makes coaching very unique. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but I think whether it's a coach or a mentor or a sponsor, so long as you line yourself up with more than one, you know, and create that culture of shared accountability, you have a much greater likelihood of being successful and enjoying your career versus really just kind of grinding it out.
Yeah, and I agree. Like leadership courses, like leadership programs, they don't focus on that. And I was literally like, I don't know if I was posting about it or something, but I was like, and it's like we are, there's so much money that we spend as organizations, right, on all these leadership developments, but it's usually the wrong place to spend it. And I think in that article, I was like talking about how there's always going to be somebody who's going to take, a huge fee for that 1-day workshop on leadership, and knowing well that it's probably not going to have a good return on investment for the company. Because in fact, what we know, and being in our field, know that what's impactful is that continuous accountability that is consistent and continuous through a period of time. Right. And this is where coaching, I think, is powerful. And I think some of those, like, I get it, like, yes, people need to make money and all that, but some of those people that or companies even that hire and expect miracles from a 1-day workshop, I think it's giving it a bad rap. It's giving this leadership development, and that's why it's, this coaching world a bad rap. And there is power to it if it's done right, if there's a follow-up process after that 1-day workshop, like a program or coaching engagement.
Yeah, and the word that comes to my mind as I hear you speak is resonance. The problem with so many leadership programs today is that they're skill-based. Right. And sometimes there's like 10 or 20% of like practice and role model or role playing, if you will. But I think what's missing is you need to feel something. To make any change in behavior, to make any change in your day-to-day leadership, it has to connect emotionally, or else it just doesn't stick. And so looking for what's resonant will greatly improve the chances of someone walking out of a leadership program, which perhaps maybe has a coaching cohort involved with it, with an increased level of desire to practice something. Because you and I, we both come from corporate worlds. We know what this is like. You go to a workshop, at the best of times, you walk away going, oh, I love that. And then you forget 70% of it. I think that's the actual stat, actually, that learning
within like within a week, you forget most of it or something.
Yeah, it's so quick. And so the greatest change that I've ever seen in my leadership career following that burnout episode was when I worked for, I think, 2 years with a coach to really unravel the faulty belief systems I had about leadership and about myself. And then I actually was able to practice that in the field as an executive. And that And the reason I did that was because it was resonant. I felt something from doing it. I felt a source of pride. I felt a sense of agency. I felt a sense of being in full authority of my voice. Those
Mm.
are things that are very hard to create in a leadership program. I'm not saying they're impossible, but I believe there has to be a human element, one-to-one design when you're looking at something like that.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, naturally I'm biased, but I do tend to agree with that just because it's a lot of the results, at least what I've seen in talent development, is usually around that. And
Yeah.
so I hire external providers. I am an external provider in some cases, and I see it, and that's where the most impact happens. So it's an investment, but it pays off, and I feel like it's something that companies need to do more of, and companies
Mhm.
and leaders are doing more of that, is investing in these kind of development. So on your coaching seems to also focus a lot on kind of core that emotional intelligence, right? Resiliency, and also trauma-informed leadership.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about that. How do these skills contribute to being a successful leader?
Yeah. Well, I'll speak to the hardest one first, maybe the trauma informed. So I think part of my experience in having recovered from burnout and then consequently getting coached, and I also am a big believer in therapy and therapeutic circles as well, is that so much of our behavior is shaped. And we call this, in the terminology that I come from, conditioned tendencies. These are the ways in which we automatically react under pressure. So that's a conditioned tendency. And then a shaping force is, what are all those things that gave rise to that tendency? So your childhood, your schooling system, the country you were born in, the
Mm,
cultural, the institutions, your religion, if you have one, like there's so many shaping forces that, left undiscussed, really do a disservice to understanding the whole person. So, in my approach to coaching, and again because it was gifted to me, is very much an approach where I'm not a therapist, but we do bring in how we were shaped and what else might we consider when it comes to our shaping in ways of responding that are more adaptive versus maladaptive.
mm,
So really untangling the effects of trauma. Unfortunately, I did grow up in a under pretty traumatic circles. My father was a very violent man. He has since done different things to help himself, and I forgive him, and that's all wonderful. But you can't think that that's not going to have an impact on you as
right.
you grow up as a leader, especially for myself in relating to men of authority. That was a really important lesson for me. So I do believe that it has a place to understand how you're shaping and how any past traumas may have contributed to how you lead. I also think that kind of leads to the second thing you mentioned, which is around resiliency.
Mm-hmm.
The beauty of recovering from trauma, which I believe I have in many cases, but you still live with some effects, is that you build this really strong inner resolve and grittiness about you. And when I think of resilience, I don't really believe in the whole it's all about bouncing back. I believe it's about understanding your story and how you respond to events from a place of how it's enhanced your life versus how it's diminished you. So I try to bring in that different modalities in the coaching container because I do believe that one of the most future forward skills, and I'm hearing this from HR executives everywhere in different think tanks, is resiliency. The ability to adapt, the ability to switch tasks, the
Mm,
ability to change priorities can be very difficult for people. And we know that change and transformation is not going anywhere. And so
mm,
cultivating that ability to adapt to change and to create a more resilient mindset that allows you to think differently, allows you to bring in more of that growth mindset, allows you to think on the more positive pole of things versus the negative pole, is a huge advantage for both leaders, but also for organizations because
mm.
it's again, it's the future forward skill that is most missing in many organizations today. People are tired. And so
Mm.
we need to somehow mitigate against this missing skill that many people have, which is how do I adapt to changing circumstances in a way that I'm not undone by it?
Yeah, I think that you're spot on with that, because as we become more, especially the more senior you become in your career, um, you become almost like there's a lot of distractions as well. So like, like technology is great, but it's very distracting. And then people who have families, you have continuous distractions and worries and everything around you. And at the same time, it seems that responsibilities at work keep growing, and with any leadership role, it grows. So it becomes even more important to take care of that, of your well-being piece,
Yeah.
because it's, I mean, as you know, it's everything, right? Because it's like, it's like, you gotta, it's like if you don't take care of your car, if you don't change your oil, it's gonna die down, right? It's gonna stop working, right? The silly comparison, but it's true. And it's like, and we don't, and then I always think, like, at each level, when you hit a new obstacle or challenge, it's not like you're going to be super ready and resilient, but you have a better, the way I see it is like you're going to have a better, how to say, a better muscle, so to say, to deal with it. So if you know what I mean, if you're taking care of your body and mind, then whenever something happens, even if you're not ready for it, you'll hopefully be able to bounce back faster, right?
Yeah.
Instead of, what I'm saying? So if you're building,
Yeah.
so it's like I don't know if you can, I don't know, because resilience is like, everybody has different levels of resilience depending on how much they've been exposed to. But I
Mhm.
think no matter what it is, if people take care of their minds and bodies and
Mhm.
understand that connection that you talk about,
Oh
I
yeah.
think that will make you better at whatever
Yeah.
crap is going to come your way. So talk to me
Oh yeah.
about that body mind connection. And
Oh yeah. No, I'm 100% with you. I think of a couple things when it comes to the mind body. So, um, in the purely traditional sense, I mean, I know you are someone that loves to work out. I'm the same. I'm a big advocate of physical health. I feel unusually odd if I don't do something every day. I need to get outside. I need that. I call it ecotherapy. I need exercise. Those are really, really important things to me. And I think they're very, very important habits that are essential to well-being, without a doubt. I also think that part of the whole mind body integration, from my perspective, is I think a little bit of what I said earlier is going from a place of knowing something intellectually to actually feeling it in your body. So I think that the more we can start to get in touch with the signals that our body sends us, much like we do when we are working out and when we feel like we've hit a max and we need to pull it back, or we need to push forward depending on the goal. It's much like the same thing. It's really just becoming what I call highly attuned. So
mm,
how do we become more highly attuned to our thinking habits, to our physical habits, to those sensations that our body sends us, to, I think, to all of those signals, because the body speaks wisdom. And again, I don't want to sound too woo, because I think people get a little bit freaked out when I bring that up. And what I'm essentially saying is that we are cognitive humans. We think from our head up, like
mm-hmm,
most of the time. But a lot of the intuition, a lot of that gut instinct, a lot of that um, decision making power lies below the chin. We're
mm-hmm,
just not attuned to listening to those signals. So, an example is a few things I do with my clients, and I'm not sure if they're familiar to you too, but we do a lot of centering, we do a lot of grounding, we do a
mm-hmm,
lot of somatic work where we're in
mm-hmm.
the body and we're really listening to what intuition might be telling us. And of course, you balance that with logic. Like, it's not just
Right.
about listening entirely to your body and nothing else. We do have a brain and a
Yeah.
thinking head for a reason, but it's about integrating the two. It's not
Right.
about just one or the other. So I just think that when it comes to well-being, the more we can make decisions that are integrated with both our thinking mind and our physical mental selves, the more successful we will be.
Hmm. I don't think it's woo-woo at all. I think it's, there's a lot of science as well that
Yeah.
comes out that's it's, and I do know that some people are like, oh, this is a little bit, etc. But I think because we've been conditioned to ignore the signs and instead take a pain pill or a
Yeah.
medicine or something like that, that actually makes it worse. So we're just putting a band-aid on a broken leg essentially.
Yeah.
And we do this in many areas of our lives
Mm.
because the other part is harder. It's harder to ask, what do I really want? It's harder
Mhm.
to make a change. It's harder to recognize where it's hard because when you start being aware, and I've gone through this, I was also very, not paying attention, all that. Like, I feel like my whole 20s were a mess, and now I'm spending my 30s rebuilding myself essentially.
Yeah.
But I think that there is, that's how we used to live back in the day, right? Like we didn't have these technologies. People just literally were in tune with their bodies and tried to understand. And we did just fine as human beings. Yes, we died earlier because of illnesses and stuff like that. But you get what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
we have been listening to our bodies. And I think that we just became, like you said, we're just too cognitive. We're too up here because we became so smart, and it's great as a society, as a species. But we forget that our body is still pure biology. And
Yeah.
it's just that's it. Like it's that, you just have to listen to it. You know what I mean?
Oh my
That's been
God,
around
yeah.
forever.
I agree. And we live in information overload too. So we're like consistently bombarded with messages and articles and new research and publications and look, I'm a huge reader. I love learning and I will always love learning. But I think sometimes this is what I do know. Managing overwhelm is probably the number one task or problem that my clients have. They are overwhelmed, whether it's in their career, and most times it's a combination of career and life. And one of the things they want the most is help me reduce the level of overwhelm that I feel in my body and in my mind. And I think that one of the quickest ways to do that, but it's still so often ignored, although I agree with you, I think it's gaining traction now, is in paying attention to the physical sensations of the body. It is in going outside for 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It is in those, what I think are maybe less sexy alternatives, but that have been around forever and ever, which is essentially learning to really listen to the body and get in touch with it and not ignore it. So much healing, I think, starts from that place. I've seen it. I've seen it with my clients. I've seen it with myself. It's 100%. I think one of the ways we reduce overwhelm is the simple act of listening to what are the signals of my body telling me.
Mm. Yeah, and I think for women also, we feel almost guilty, if we start. And I think that's what's hard, because like I hear, just like I have one of my close friends, and she's overachiever and a mother and a wife and all of that, and she's just like, she just doesn't feel like she can give herself the time. She understands, like, logically, like,
Yeah.
yes, I know I need to, but just not now. Like,
Mhm.
not now. So it's like, and it's, and it's hard to, because it's like, it's hard to break through that, right? And usually friends are like the
Yeah.
worst people to, like, okay, well, like, you're my friend, so like it's hard to, when a stranger tells you these things, it's different. That's why I love to send these episodes to my friends. I'm like, different episodes, I'm like, listen to this person.
This
I'm
is
not
for
saying
you.
it, this is an expert, this is not me. But it's just, I think for women, we also feel a lot of guilt. I mean, myself included, when I don't work, and I'm a recovering workaholic, and I'm going from like 7 days a week working, for years, and just like always have to be doing something. And that, to me, comes from just understanding that when I was growing up, I didn't feel like I was enough, and it's like, and I'm always chasing something. I have to prove
Yeah.
something, and
Yeah.
it takes a lot. So, and I understand. I talk to brilliant people like yourself on these topics, and it's still very hard. And
For
I'm
sure.
in this world, so when you're out there, add the guilt and all of that, it just becomes, I think it's, I'm empathetic to people that go through that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, that's the number one thing I hear from women as well, is I just don't have the time.
Mm,
Or and oftentimes it's not so much they don't have the time, it's that they don't have the energy.
right. Yeah.
And I think that's a big differentiator, because I like to decouple time when I hear that from
Mm,
people, because I mean, I could say that about so many things. I hear myself saying that about so many things. But what it really gets down to is, where's my energy? Like,
Hmm.
where am I placing my energy? I think once, and this is part of the resiliency work I do with Heart Math, which is an institution that's dedicated to understanding and studying resilience, very scientific. And one of the things that they taught us when we were trained many years ago is that resilience is really all about energy versus depletion. So if you want to increase your resiliency battery life, if you will, then it's really about asking yourself, where's your energy? When you're able to take a step back, even for a moment, and say to yourself, where am I spending most of my time? Is this renewing me or is this depleting me? Then, only then can we then start to pull back from that depletion list and start creating capacity. But I think that in the beginning, especially for women who are overwhelmed, it's like we have to make it easy for them. We have to show them easy ways to just dip their toes into starting to engage in some type of relief. Because once they taste it, they want more of it. It's just that first initial step. And this is where one of my coaches, I remember the first time I signed up for coaching after I suffered from burnout, it was very expensive. And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to do this.
Hmm.
And I remember my husband just said, just do it. Just don't think about it. Just press send and don't think. And that alone was the best advice I could have ever had, because overthinking is another form of depletion.
Hmm.
And I think that overthinking is also what contributes to energy drain for so many high achieving women. And so if we can just reduce the decisions in a way that's simplistic for them, it really does help them take the necessary steps.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And so this program, is it how, tell me a little bit more about it. Like, is it in cohorts? Do you run it over the 6 months? I think that's kind of where you see
Yeah,
those results, right? Where people's
yeah,
like stress level go down, everything kind of stabilizes. It's
yeah.
like significantly for a lot of your participants. So
Yeah,
what does that look
I
like?
yeah, thank you for asking. Yeah, it's a 6 month program. Right now, it's an open enrollment, so people can come in as month to month, depending on the client. And I think the biggest part of the Crucible, its mission is to help eradicate symptoms of burnout while also providing them with clarity on the next steps in their career. Because so often I see the two together. They
Mm,
come in, they're not sure about their career anymore, but they're so exhausted and stressed out that they just can't see the forest through the trees, right? So we kind of work on both. But number one is always about what I call calming and stabilizing the nervous system. So let's come in, let's stabilize the nervous system. Let's work on different ways in which we can start to do that. Get some quick wins on that front, which again usually happens between month 1 and 3. And then we can start doing some of that deeper work around, is this the career for me? Am
mm,
I in the right job? What boundaries do I need to create? What beliefs am I holding on to that are keeping me trapped? That's when we start getting into some more of that deeper work. And oftentimes, I mean, many of my clients they end up either getting promoted or they end up leaving the company because they realize this is not for them. I see a lot of that too, and they find another job and they love their new job because they come from a place of clarity. They know what they want now, and
mm,
that starts with knowing what they don't want to feel. I think that's
yeah.
the big thing about clarity is it's not about achieving a certain objective. It's about knowing what you want to feel. That's the greatest
Mm.
form of clarity I think women get from the curriculum in the Crucible and in the coaching.
Mm. And I like it that you tackle that kind of inner piece almost first, because I see, a lot of coaches out there, they'll just kind of skip that part. But I
Yeah,
think it's so important because you don't want somebody making decisions based on emotion or because they're tired. I mean,
yeah,
I've made so many bad decisions because I was
yeah,
tired.
yeah,
Like, you know what I mean? Like, because I'm just exhausted and it's emotional and it's out of fear. And I think stabilizing the nervous system that's a good move. I think that's really good. Like I mean, it just makes sense, and I like it that you combine the two because it's not just the straightforward. And some people just look for that, yes, but I think you make much better decisions when you your nervous system is in tune with you, essentially.
Yeah, it's a difference between, individuals who just quit and go for another job without really understanding what they want, and they end up in the same situation and miserable
Yeah.
because they don't have the tools or the skills. That's one end. And the difference is that they actually know what they stand for. They know what they
Yeah.
value, they know what they prioritize, and they make decisions from a future forward space versus a running away space, which is a very different energy in career change.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And before I ask you my last question, where can people find you? Where do you spend most of your time online?
Yeah. Two places I think are the best. My website, super easy. There's a bunch of different free downloadables to help for women to help kind of ascertain where they're at in their career, what they need to stop doing, where they're at with burnout. That's teresavozza.ca or .com. I own both domains, so if you screw it up, because I'm in Canada, you can go to .com and it'll still be there. And the second place is LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I love that platform. I do a lot of thought leadership there. So that would be the second place where they can get a hold of me as well.
Amazing. And the last question I ask all of my guests is, what is one question you wish people ask themselves more often?
Oh, yeah. I was really excited about this question, Elena. I won't lie. I think it's what will you stop doing?
Mhm.
I think that we are so focused on what we need to add. It's like a process of addition. And I think there's a lot of relief in daily asking yourself, what will I not do today? What will I stop doing? And that
Mm.
could be as broad as I will stop procrastinating on that piece I need to write for this publication, which is like in my case, or it could be as minor as I'm going to stop complaining in the morning as I get my kids ready to bed. It could be simple and granular, it can be broad, but I think it's training the muscle of becoming more comfortable with doing less and reducing that level of stress and overload.
Mm. Amazing. Well, you have inspired me to ask myself that question as well, and just see where I can do a little bit less. Like I said, I'm a recovering workaholic, so learning and growing with my guests. So thank you so much for coming on the show and for sharing your knowledge.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.